The luxury restaurant, La Maison Elegante, was packed with wealthy guests, laughing and sipping expensive wine. A soft golden glow bathed the marble floors, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. Among the sea of elites sat a man alone in the corner, a simple black suit, worn boots, and long dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Keanu Reeves stirred his coffee silently, observing the world around him. His presence didn't match the usual clientele. The other guests wore designer suits and shimmering gowns, but he was just himself. The waiter, Pierre, a tall, thin man with an upturned nose, noticed Keanu's modest attire. A sneer crept onto his face as he approached the table. "Sir," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I believe you're in the wrong place. This restaurant is exclusive." Keanu simply smiled, his kind eyes unfazed. "I'd like to order something." Pierre scoffed. "Do you even know how expensive our menu is? A single dish here costs more than your entire outfit." Keanu glanced at the menu without concern. "I'll have the chef's special, please." Pierre rolled his eyes. "Fine, but don't waste my time if you can't pay." He turned sharply, muttering under his breath, "Some people just don't belong here." Across the room, a group of rich businessmen chuckled, amused by the scene. One whispered, "That guy looks like Keanu Reeves, but no way he'd be eating here alone." Little did they know, the man they were mocking wasn't just another customer. He owned the restaurant, and soon everyone would find out. Keanu sat back in his chair, unfazed by Pierre's dismissive attitude. He had encountered people like this before, those who judged others based on appearance alone. But what truly mattered was character, and Pierre had already revealed his. Across the room, whispers spread like wildfire. Some guests smirked, nudging their companions. Others threw pitying glances at Keanu, assuming he was an out-of-place commoner. At a nearby table, a wealthy couple, Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, watched with mild amusement. Mrs. Donovan, draped in diamonds, leaned over. "Darling, isn't it sad? People like him think they can just walk in anywhere." Mr. Donovan chuckled, sipping his wine. "They never last long. Watch, the waiter will humiliate him, and he'll scurry out." Meanwhile, Pierre returned with a forced smile, setting down a glass of water. "While you wait for your meal, perhaps you'd like to see our prices again?" He emphasized the word, hoping to intimidate Keanu. Keanu merely nodded. "I'm fine, thank you." His voice was calm, steady. Pierre huffed. "Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you." As he turned away, another waiter, Sophia, approached. She was younger, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. Unlike Pierre, she recognized Keanu immediately, though she kept her composure. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered. "Would you like anything else while you wait?" Keanu smiled warmly. "No, thank you. You're very kind." Sophia hesitated before walking away. She knew something that the others didn't. In the kitchen, the head chef, a burly man named Marco, was preparing the meal when Pierre strolled in, snickering. "Table 5, Pierre said. "Some nobody pretending to belong here. Let's serve him something basic." Marco frowned. "We treat every guest with respect here." Pierre smirked. "Come on, you know he doesn't belong." Marco glanced out the kitchen window, eyes narrowing as he recognized his boss. The tension was about to explode. In the bustling kitchen of La Maison Elegante, Chef Marco tightened his grip on the knife he was holding. His sharp eyes flicked toward table 5, where Keanu sat, still calm and composed. "You're telling me that man doesn't belong here?" Marco asked, keeping his voice steady. Pierre laughed smugly. "Look at him. He's dressed like some struggling actor. He doesn't fit in with our real clientele." Marco's jaw tightened. He had worked under Keanu for years, ever since the actor had secretly invested in the restaurant. Unlike most rich owners, Keanu never flaunted his status. He treated everyone with respect, from the dishwashers to the servers. Marco exhaled slowly. "Pierre, do you know who that man is?" Pierre scoffed. "Some broke guy who wandered in here?" Marco shook his head. "That man owns this restaurant." Silence filled the kitchen. A junior chef dropped a pan, and a few waiters who had overheard exchanged shocked glances. Pierre's face drained of color. "What?" he stammered. Marco wiped his hands on his apron and stepped forward, lowering his voice. "And if you had any sense, you'd be careful how you treat him. He could fire you right now." Pierre swallowed hard, glancing back toward the dining area. Keanu hadn't reacted to the humiliation. He wasn't making a scene, wasn't demanding respect. He was just sitting there. Marco leaned in. "Do you want me to tell him what you just said about him?" Pierre's hands started shaking. No, I didn't know. Marco folded his arms. Then you better fix this before it's too late. Pierre hesitated. Should he apologize? Would Keanu be the type to let this slide? One thing was certain, his job was on the line. Pierre's mind raced. He had spent years perfecting his place in this restaurant, ensuring he was seen as the best waiter. But now, he had insulted the owner without realizing it. His throat felt dry as he grabbed a tray, placing the finest silverware and folded linen napkins on it. Maybe if he acted quickly, he could smooth things over before Keanu got angry, or worse, before Marco told him everything. Stepping back into the dining area, Pierre forced a polite smile, though his palms were sweating. He approached Keanu's table, placing the silverware down extra carefully. "Sir," he said, his tone suddenly softer, "I apologize for the delay. The chef is preparing something special just for you." Keanu raised an eyebrow, but his face remained unreadable. He simply nodded. Pierre hesitated, waiting for some sign of annoyance or anger. But Keanu didn't react the way he had expected. No outrage, no smugness, just quiet patience. Feeling emboldened, Pierre tried again. "Please allow me to offer you a complimentary drink, on the house, a token of our appreciation." At that moment, the wealthy couple, Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, who had been mocking Keanu earlier, watched in confusion. Mrs. Donovan narrowed her eyes. "Why is Pierre suddenly treating that man with such respect?" Mr. Donovan shrugged. Maybe he realized his mistake. Pierre carefully poured a glass of the restaurant's finest wine, hoping to shift the narrative. Maybe, just maybe, he could convince Keanu that his earlier behavior was just a misunderstanding. But before he could say anything else, Sophia, the kind waitress, approached. She had been watching everything unfold, and she couldn't stay silent anymore. "Why the sudden change of heart, Pierre?" she asked, arms crossed. Pierre stiffened. "What do you mean?" Sophia tilted her head. "Just a moment ago, you were mocking him. What happened?" Keanu glanced between them, a slight smile playing on his lips. He already knew the answer. Pierre felt a cold sweat form on his brow. Sophia's words hung in the air, challenging him, exposing him. He glanced around nervously, noticing the curious gazes of nearby diners. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan leaned in, eager for drama. "I don't know what you're talking about," Pierre stammered. "I always treat my customers with respect." Sophia crossed her arms. "Really? Because earlier, I heard you saying he doesn't belong here." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. The tension thickened as more guests turned their heads, drawn in by the unfolding spectacle. Keanu remained silent, watching. Pierre forced a chuckle, attempting to regain control. "That was just a misunderstanding. I thought he might be lost, that's all." He turned to Keanu with an exaggerated smile. "I sincerely apologize, sir." Keanu finally spoke. "You don't have to apologize if you don't mean it." Pierre flinched. His fake smile faltered. Sophia took a deep breath, deciding to reveal everything. "Pierre, do you even know who you've been talking down to?" Pierre gulped. His throat tightened. Marco, who had just stepped out of the kitchen, folded his arms and said, "Tell him, Sophia." Sophia turned to the crowd, her voice clear. "This man isn't just a customer, he owns this restaurant." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The chatter ceased. Every eye was now glued to Keanu. Pierre felt his legs go weak. "What?" he whispered. Keanu, still composed, finally met Pierre's wide-eyed gaze. "You judged me the moment I walked in," he said calmly. "And now you're only treating me differently because you're scared." Pierre's mouth opened, but no words came out. And just like that, his fate was sealed. Silence hung over the restaurant like a thick fog. Pierre's heart pounded. His mind raced, trying to find a way out of this disaster, but the judgmental stares from guests and staff alike made it clear. His mistake was undeniable. Mr. Donovan chuckled under his breath. "Looks like someone's career just ended." Mrs. Donovan sipped her wine. How embarrassing. Pierre's mouth was dry. He forced himself to laugh nervously. "Sir, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have..." Keanu raised a hand, cutting him off. "That's the problem, Pierre." Pierre's breath caught in his throat. Keanu's voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. "You shouldn't treat people with kindness just because of their status. Respect should be given to everyone." A few guests nodded in agreement. Others, who had smirked at Pierre's earlier arrogance, now looked at him with disdain. Marco stepped forward, arms crossed. "Keanu has been our silent owner for years. He built this restaurant with his own money, not to serve only the rich, but to create an experience for everyone. And you, he pointed a finger at Pierre, decided to act like a gatekeeper. That's not how we do things here. Pierre's hands shook. Please, give me a chance. I can change. Keanu sighed. Change shouldn't come from fear of consequences. It should come from the heart. Pierre felt his stomach drop. He knew what was coming next. Keanu glanced at Marco. You know what to do. Marco nodded, stepping forward. Pierre, hand over your apron. Pierre's face turned pale. Everything he had built, gone in an instant. Pierre's hands trembled as he fumbled with the strings of his apron. The once proud waiter, who had strutted around the restaurant with arrogance, now stood humiliated before everyone. The sound of hushed whispers filled the room. Some diners exchanged smug glances, enjoying the spectacle. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. No one spoke up for Pierre. Marco extended his hand. Pierre, now. Pierre's lips parted as if he wanted to protest, but he saw the finality in Keanu's expression. There was no escape. With shaky fingers, he untied the apron and slowly handed it over. Marco took it without a word. Sophia, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. I hope you learned something from this. Pierre's head snapped toward her. Learn what? He snapped, frustration breaking through his voice. That you should treat people with kindness, Sophia said simply. Not just the ones who look rich. Pierre clenched his fists. The realization that he had been exposed, humiliated, and dismissed in front of everyone was too much. He turned toward Keanu, desperation flickering in his eyes. I swear, I'm not a bad person, he said. I was just doing what I thought was right. Keanu sighed, stirring his coffee. Then maybe it's time to rethink what you believe is right. The weight of those words hit Pierre like a brick wall. Marco motioned toward the door. It's best you leave. Pierre hesitated. Leaving meant facing the world outside, where he was nothing but an unemployed waiter. But staying meant enduring the shame for another second. With a deep breath, he turned and walked out. As the door swung shut behind him, the restaurant exhaled. The tension lifted, but the lesson remained. As the door swung shut, the tension that had gripped the restaurant began to dissolve. The once curious murmurs of the wealthy guests faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The scene they had just witnessed was unexpected, and for some, eye-opening. Sophia let out a slow breath, glancing at Keanu. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Keanu shook his head, offering a small smile. It's not the first time, probably won't be the last. Marco placed Pierre's apron on the counter, his face unreadable. We should have caught his attitude sooner. Keanu took a sip of his coffee. Sometimes people reveal who they really are when they think no one important is watching. Mr. Donovan, still reeling from the revelation, leaned toward his wife. Can you believe it? Keanu Reeves owns this place. Mrs. Donovan, for the first time that night, looked a little embarrassed, and we were laughing at him earlier. Meanwhile, other diners whispered among themselves, rethinking their assumptions. Some had found Pierre's actions amusing at first, but now they were faced with the truth. They had silently approved of someone being mistreated. Sophia cleared her throat. Would you like me to bring out your meal now? Keanu smiled. Yes, please. Marco patted her shoulder. I'll make sure it's perfect. He disappeared into the kitchen. Across the restaurant, another waiter, one who had stayed quiet during the drama, straightened his tie. With Pierre gone, there was a shift in energy. People began to wonder, had they ever treated someone unfairly? Had they ever made someone feel unwelcome? Keanu had done nothing but sit quietly, yet his presence alone had changed something in the air. And the night wasn't over yet. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted. Where there was once arrogance and judgment, now lingered reflection and quiet admiration. The guests who had snickered at Keanu before now glanced at him with curiosity, even respect. Sophia returned moments later, carefully setting down a beautifully plated dish. The chef made sure this was prepared perfectly for you. Keanu looked at the meal, seared Wagyu steak with truffle butter, accompanied by a delicate arrangement of seasonal vegetables. A meal meant for someone worthy of luxury. Thank you, Sophia, he said warmly. She smiled, then hesitated before speaking. If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you say anything earlier, when Pierre was insulting you? Keanu looked at the meal, seared Wagyu steak with truffle butter, accompanied by a delicate arrangement of seasonal vegetables. A meal meant for someone worthy of luxury. "Thank you, Sophia," he said warmly. She smiled, then hesitated before speaking. "If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you say anything earlier? When Pierre was insulting you?" Keanu chuckled lightly, cutting into the steak. "Because I wanted to see how far he'd go. Some people only respect power and money. I wanted to know if he was one of them." Sophia nodded, understanding now. And now he's gone. Keanu took a bite, savoring the rich flavors. Yes, but maybe, someday, he'll realize why. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Marco observed through the small window in the door. Seeing Keanu enjoy the meal brought a sense of pride. He turned to his staff. "Let this be a reminder. We don't judge our customers by their clothes. We judge them by their character." The younger chefs and waiters nodded, absorbing the lesson. Back in the dining area, a few guests mustered the courage to approach. A middle-aged businessman who had earlier dismissed Keanu as a nobody now stood by his table. "I just wanted to say," he hesitated, "I was wrong about you." Keanu wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked up. "I know." The man nodded respectfully and walked away, leaving Keanu to enjoy his meal, this time without judgment. The evening seemed to return to a quiet hum as Keanu ate his meal, his surroundings now far more relaxed than when he had first arrived. The earlier tension had settled into a peaceful calm, and the whispers that once buzzed around him had grown into muted conversations. He could feel the eyes that occasionally lingered his way, but they weren't filled with judgment anymore, only curiosity and respect. Sophia, now far more comfortable after the earlier tension, approached the table once more, this time with a friendly smile. "How's the meal, sir?" Keanu looked up, his smile soft but genuine. "Perfect. The chef really knows what he's doing." Sophia's face brightened. "I'll be sure to tell him, and thank you for being so patient with everything." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "You don't need to thank me, Sophia. I was the one who was treated poorly, and you handled it well." She smiled again, clearly relieved. But as she turned to leave, the restaurant's front door opened with a soft chime. A familiar figure stepped through, a man in his 50s, wearing a sharp black suit with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. The man scanned the room briefly, his eyes locking onto Keanu's. His face was expressionless, yet there was something intense about the way he looked at him. Without a word, the man walked directly toward Keanu's table, and a quiet murmur spread throughout the room as the guests began to notice the visitor. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, his voice cool and controlled. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Do I know you?" The man smiled thinly, pulling out a chair to sit across from him. "We've never met, but I know you. I'm David Matthews, CEO of Matthews Enterprises." Keanu's gaze sharpened. He didn't know this man, but he knew the name. Matthews Enterprises was a major player in the corporate world, with connections everywhere. David leaned forward, his gaze still unwavering. "I came here tonight to speak with you, Mr. Reeves. I've heard a lot about you, but there's something I'd like to discuss." Keanu folded his arms, a quiet curiosity piquing in him. "Go on." David Matthews settled back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him, almost as though he were preparing to present a carefully calculated pitch. Keanu studied him, the air around the table thick with a sense of anticipation. "I won't waste your time, Mr. Reeves," David began, his voice calm but confident. "I'm sure you know that Matthews Enterprises has been expanding rapidly over the last few years. We're looking to enter the hospitality industry in a major way, and this restaurant, La Maison Elegante, has caught our eye." Keanu's expression remained neutral, but inwardly, he was already aware of what was coming. He had dealt with corporate sharks before, people who saw everything in terms of money and expansion. David continued, seemingly oblivious to Keanu's growing disinterest. "I'd like to make you an offer. We're willing to buy this restaurant, keep it running under your name, but with the added benefit of a much larger infrastructure backing it." Keanu raised an eyebrow, cutting him off. "And what's in it for me exactly?" David's smile didn't waver. "A very generous percentage of the profits, of course. With our resources, we could take La Maison Elegante to a whole new level. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. Just keep running things as you have been, and we'll take care of the rest." Keanu's mind clicked into gear. He had spent years building this place, ensuring it remained a sanctuary for the kind of experience he valued. The thought of giving that up for corporate greed didn't sit well with him, but he kept his expression carefully controlled. "And what's the catch?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but with an edge. "You're offering me a piece of the pie, but you still get control of the whole thing." David leaned in, his tone now more insistent. "Think about it. With our support, you could expand, open new locations, build a brand that's untouchable. You'd be set for life." Keanu considered his words carefully. The offer was tempting, but it would mean compromising the core values that had shaped La Maison Elegante from the start. "No," Keanu said simply, shaking his head. "I didn't build this place for it to become just another cog in your corporate machine." David's smile faltered, but only slightly. "I see. Well, then, I guess there's no deal." He stood up to leave, but not before adding, "A missed opportunity, Mr. Reeves." Keanu watched him go, his mind still racing. He had made the right choice, but the temptation to sell was always there. The door swung shut with a soft chime as David Matthews exited, leaving behind a lingering tension in the air. Keanu leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the table before him, the weight of the offer still hanging heavily in his mind. Sophia, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, returned to his table. She had witnessed the conversation with a growing sense of concern. She stood silently for a moment before speaking softly. "Is everything okay?" Keanu sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's fine, just another day in the world of business." Sophia raised an eyebrow, sensing that there was more to the situation than Keanu was letting on. "He wasn't offering you something good?" Keanu shook his head. "It wasn't about the money. It's just..." His voice trailed off, as if searching for the right words. "He wanted to take everything I've built and turn it into just another business deal. A brand. He doesn't understand what this place means to me, or to the people who come here." Sophia nodded, her understanding clear. She had always respected the authenticity of La Maison Elegante. It wasn't just a place to eat. It was an experience, a reflection of Keanu's vision, not some soulless venture for profit. Keanu looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks for asking, though. It's nice to know someone cares." Sophia smiled back, her eyes softening. "Of course, you're the heart of this place." Keanu leaned forward, his gaze steady. "That's the problem with offers like his. They don't see the heart, they just see the potential for profit. And maybe I've been lucky, but I've built this from the ground up. It's mine. It's all I have." A brief silence fell over them as Sophia took a moment to reflect on his words. She could see the passion that still burned in Keanu's eyes. "Don't let anyone take that from you," she said quietly, her voice filled with conviction. "Some things are worth more than money." Keanu smiled, his resolve solidifying. He had made his choice. This restaurant would never be for sale, not for any amount of money. It was about the people, the experiences, and the respect that came with it. And as the night continued, La Maison Elegante thrived, not just as a place to eat, but as a symbol of integrity in a world that often sacrificed it for convenience. As the evening wore on, La Maison Elegante slowly returned to its natural rhythm. The buzz of conversation, the clink of silverware, the soft music playing in the background, all of it filled the space once more. But beneath the normalcy, something had shifted. The events of the night had already begun to leave a lasting impact on the restaurant, its staff, and even the guests. Sophia noticed the change immediately. As she moved between tables, guests seemed to speak with more respect and appreciation than before. There were no more hushed whispers of judgment toward Keanu. Instead, diners took their time to savor the experience, to enjoy their meals in the atmosphere that had been carefully crafted over the years. It was subtle, but it was there. People were more present, more connected to the moment. They were no longer simply here to consume, they were here to appreciate. Sophia couldn't help but smile to herself. The lesson that Keanu had subtly imparted was beginning to take root. Even the new staff, who had only recently joined, seemed to be working with a new energy. They took their time with the guests, ensuring everything was perfect, not just because it was their job, but because they genuinely cared about the experience they were providing. As the night drew on, Keanu finished his meal, quietly observing the transformation that was unfolding. He didn't need to say anything. The restaurant was speaking for itself now. He stood up to leave, signaling to Marco, who had been keeping an eye on him from the kitchen. Marco came over, his usual grin now replaced with something more sincere. "Thank you," Marco said, "for everything. You've shown us all something tonight." Keanu shook his head, offering a modest smile. "It wasn't just me. It's always been about the people here. They just needed a reminder." As Keanu stepped out of the restaurant, the cool night air wrapped around him, and he felt a sense of peace. He had made the right choice. The world outside was full of corporate deals and power plays, but La Maison Elegante would remain untouched by it. It was a place of authenticity, and that was something that couldn't be bought. As he walked into the night, Keanu knew one thing for sure. Sometimes standing firm in your beliefs was all it took to change everything. The morning after the events of the previous night felt different. La Maison Elegante was still standing, still in business, but there was a new energy in the air. The incident with Pierre and David Matthews' offer had shaken things up, but in its wake, something positive had emerged. Keanu arrived early, as he often did, to check on the restaurant. He walked through the kitchen doors, greeted by the familiar hum of activity. The chefs worked with precision, but this morning, there was an added sense of purpose in their movements. They seemed to be working not just for a paycheck, but for something more. Sophia was already at the front, arranging the tables for the day's guests. She smiled at Keanu as he entered. "Good morning." "Morning," Keanu replied, his tone lighter than usual. "I noticed a change in the air today." Sophia nodded, her eyes glinting with something akin to pride. "It's been like this since last night. I don't think anyone can forget what happened." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "In a good way, I hope?" Sophia chuckled. "Definitely in a good way. People are treating each other with more respect. The new staff is more engaged, and the guests," she paused, glancing out into the dining area, "they're taking the time to really enjoy the experience, not just rush through it." Keanu smiled, pleased. That's the way it should be. Before they could continue their conversation, Marco appeared, looking unusually serious. "Keanu, we've got a problem." Keanu's smile faded, sensing the gravity in Marco's voice. "What happened?" Marco hesitated, then handed him a piece of paper. It was an official-looking letter from Matthews Enterprises. "They've taken their offer to court. They're trying to force a buyout." Keanu's jaw tightened. He had expected that the conversation with David Matthews wasn't over, but this was more aggressive than he had anticipated. Matthews wasn't going to let it go easily. "What are they claiming?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but steely. Marco sighed. "They're trying to say the restaurant's potential was stifled without their resources. They want to use your refusal as evidence that you're unwilling to grow." Keanu crumpled the letter in his hand. "This won't be the first time someone tries to tear me down, but it will be the last." Sophia watched them both carefully. "What are you going to do?" Keanu's eyes flicked toward the dining area, the place he had poured his heart and soul into for years. He took a deep breath. "I'm going to fight back. This restaurant is more than just a business to me. It's a legacy, and I'm not letting anyone take that from me." The days following the court letter were filled with tension. Keanu spent long hours meeting with his lawyer, going over every detail of Matthews Enterprises' claims. The stakes were high. David Matthews wasn't just any businessman. He had influence, resources, and a team of legal experts at his disposal. But Keanu wasn't backing down. The fight wasn't just about ownership of La Maison Elegante. It was about something deeper. It was about preserving the soul of what he had built. His restaurant wasn't just another venture to be flipped for profit. It was a place of integrity, a haven for those who sought an authentic dining experience, and he wasn't willing to let that go. As the court date loomed closer, the tension in the restaurant grew. The staff was nervous, unsure of what would happen next, but they stood behind Keanu. Sophia, Marco, and the rest of the team were all united in their support. They had seen the change in the restaurant, the way the energy had shifted in the right direction. They knew that if Matthews succeeded, it wouldn't just hurt Keanu, it would hurt all of them. One afternoon, as the restaurant was preparing for its evening rush, Sophia approached Keanu with a concerned look on her face. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Matthews Enterprises is powerful, but maybe we can turn the tables." Keanu looked up, intrigued. What do you mean? Sophia smiled. If Matthews thinks he can win this in a court of law, maybe we should show him what really matters: public support. Keanu frowned. Public support? Yes, she continued. We've built this place on the values of authenticity and respect. What if we show the world just how much people care about La Maison Elegante? The guests, the staff, the community, they all have a stake in this. We can crowdsource support and turn the tide in our favor. Keanu paused, considering her idea. It wasn't conventional, but it felt right. Matthews had underestimated the power of community, and now it was time to make him see just how wrong he was. I like it, Keanu said finally. Let's do it. That night, Sophia and Keanu sat down to draft a message for the restaurant's patrons, asking them to share their stories about La Maison Elegante, how it had touched their lives, and why they believed it was worth saving. They would spread the message on social media, send out emails to loyal customers, and encourage anyone who felt passionately about the restaurant to get involved. It was a bold move, but Keanu had nothing to lose. And if Matthews thought he could take the heart out of the restaurant, he was about to be proven wrong. The message went live just after dinner service on a quiet Wednesday evening. Keanu and Sophia had crafted it carefully, making sure every word felt personal, every sentiment genuine. It wasn't just a plea for help, it was an invitation for the people who loved La Maison Elegante to stand with them. The post was simple, yet powerful. La Maison Elegante is more than just a restaurant. It's a community, a place where every guest is treated like family. We've built this space with care, respect, and love, and now we need your support. If you believe in what we've created here, stand with us. Share your story. Share your love for La Maison Elegante. Together, we can preserve the soul of this place. It was a call to arms, but it felt like a call to heart. The post included a link to a campaign page where people could sign a petition, leave messages of support, and contribute to the movement to keep the restaurant independent. By morning, the responses were pouring in. Guests, former staff, food critics, and even celebrities who had dined at La Maison Elegante began sharing their stories. Stories of memorable meals, personal connections, and the way the restaurant had transformed ordinary nights into extraordinary experiences. People were speaking up not just for the food, but for the values that Keanu had built into every detail of the restaurant. One message from a loyal customer read, "I've been coming here for years. This is the only place in the city where I feel like the moment I walk in, I'm home. I'm not just a customer, I'm family. Please, don't let this place become another corporate chain." Another one from a food critic. La Maison Elegante isn't just a restaurant, it's a philosophy. The care with which every dish is prepared, the respect for every guest. This place represents everything that dining should be. If you take this from us, you take away something that can never be replaced. The campaign quickly spread beyond the local community, attracting attention from media outlets. News stations began to cover the story, highlighting the restaurant's fight against Matthews Enterprises. Social media was buzzing, with the hashtag #SaveLaMaison trending by mid-afternoon. David Matthews, who had thought this would be a simple legal transaction, now found himself facing a storm he had never anticipated. The public outcry was louder than any of his corporate strategies. Keanu watched the campaign unfold, a feeling of gratitude swelling in his chest. He had known that his restaurant meant something special, but seeing the outpouring of support reaffirmed something even deeper. This place wasn't just a business to the people who had come to know it. It was a symbol of what could be accomplished when passion, authenticity, and care were at the heart of it all. Sophia approached him with a smile as she read through the messages. "I think we might just win this." Keanu nodded, his expression a mixture of determination and quiet pride. "We will." With the community behind them, they were no longer just fighting for a restaurant, they were fighting for the soul of what La Maison Elegante represented. And that was a fight Keanu was willing to win. As the days passed, the groundswell of support for La Maison Elegante only grew. Keanu had expected a few messages of encouragement, but what unfolded before him was a movement, a revolution driven by the simple belief in the power of authenticity. Social media was ablaze with stories, not just from diners, but from people who had felt the impact of Keanu's vision in ways they hadn't expected. The media continued to pick up the story. Local news stations began to feature interviews with loyal customers who spoke passionately about how La Maison Elegante had become a place of refuge in their lives. The restaurant wasn't just where they went to eat. It was where they celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and milestones. It was where they shared stories and laughter with friends and family, and it was where they found a sense of belonging. One evening, a well-known food blogger posted a lengthy review of the restaurant, not about the food itself, but about the experience of dining at La Maison Elegante. It went viral. In a world of cookie-cutter experiences, the blogger wrote, it's rare to find a place that values the human connection over the bottom line. Keanu Reeves isn't just serving food, he's serving moments. The response to this review was overwhelming. People flooded the blog's comment section, tagging friends, sharing their own experiences, and offering support for the restaurant. Soon, even food critics from other cities were weighing in, expressing their desire to visit, to be part of something that transcended the traditional dining experience. Keanu watched all of this unfold, his emotions a mix of disbelief and gratitude. The movement had taken on a life of its own. La Maison Elegante wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of the battle between corporate greed and personal integrity, and people were rallying behind it. Meanwhile, David Matthews had begun to feel the weight of the public backlash. His usual tactics of intimidation had failed to garner the results he expected. The media, which once eagerly reported on his every move, now treated him with suspicion. His offer to buy La Maison Elegante was being painted as a corporate takeover, and the negative publicity was starting to damage his reputation. In a meeting with his legal team, Matthews slammed his fist on the table. This isn't just a restaurant, it's become a cause, a movement. Do you understand what this means? His lawyer, a thin, calculating woman named Claire, watched him with a cool, measured gaze. Yes, we've underestimated the power of public opinion, but this doesn't change the facts. We still have the legal upper hand. But I agree, we need to handle this more carefully. David's eyes narrowed. I want this done. Now, I'll buy that restaurant one way or another. But the more Matthews pushed, the stronger the resistance became. Keanu wasn't going to back down. Keanu knew they were closing in on the tipping point, a moment when the public's support would be impossible to ignore. The court case was just around the corner, but the momentum was shifting in their favor. The battle was far from over, but Keanu was no longer just defending a restaurant. He was defending something far more valuable, the idea that doing the right thing mattered. And he had the community behind him, which made all the difference. The day of the court hearing arrived, and La Maison Elegante had never felt more alive or more at stake. The once quiet restaurant now had a purpose that stretched far beyond the confines of its walls. Keanu sat in the back of his office, his hands clasped together in quiet reflection. He wasn't nervous, he had passed that point long ago. But the gravity of the situation was undeniable. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the heart and soul of his dream being fought for. Sophia and Marco arrived early to offer their support, their faces determined but full of the same quiet confidence Keanu had come to expect from them. Ready? Marco asked, his voice calm but edged with the tension of the moment. Keanu nodded. Let's do this. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the warmth of La Maison Elegante. The cold marble floors, the imposing bench, and the sharp silence that filled the air made Keanu feel as though he had stepped into a different world entirely. But as he took his seat at the front, he could feel the presence of those who stood with him. The opposing side was already prepared. David Matthews, seated beside his team of high-powered lawyers, exuded an air of confidence, a man used to getting what he wanted. Claire, the lawyer who had represented Matthews in the case so far, gave Keanu a sharp, almost dismissive glance. Mr. Reeves, I trust you're ready for this? She asked, her tone patronizing. Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat back in his chair, letting the question linger in the air. He had no intention of letting Matthews or his team get under his skin. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Matthews' team argued their case with precision, focusing on the financial potential of La Maison Elegante. They painted Keanu as someone who, while passionate, was too emotionally invested to run the business effectively. They argued that the restaurant's success was limited by Keanu's refusal to scale, that the restaurant was doomed to remain a niche entity without the expansion Matthews could bring. Keanu's lawyer countered by pointing out the heart of the case, that La Maison Elegante wasn't just a business venture, it was a community. They presented the growing wave of public support, including the viral campaign that had brought the restaurant into the spotlight. When it was Keanu's turn to speak, he rose from his seat slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. He wasn't a lawyer, and he wasn't here to argue financials or potential profits. Instead, he spoke from the heart. La Maison Elegante is more than just a restaurant, he began, his voice steady. It's a place where people come to feel valued, to be treated with respect. I've built this restaurant on the idea that dining isn't just about eating, it's about connection. It's about creating an experience, not just a transaction. I won't sell that vision to the highest bidder. I can't. He paused, looking directly at the judge. This restaurant isn't for sale, not to Matthews, not to anyone. It's not just my dream. It's a place for the people who've made it their own, and I will fight to protect that, no matter what it takes. There was a long silence in the courtroom, the weight of Keanu's words sinking in. Matthews shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the public sentiment that had been stirred by Keanu's words. As the hearing continued, the judge appeared to be taking careful note of the emotional and public support that La Maison Elegante had garnered. The case was no longer just about legal ownership. It was about something deeper, something more human. The proceedings ended with no immediate decision, but the tide had shifted. It was clear that Keanu's stance had resonated with the judge and with everyone watching. Matthew's approach had been calculated and cold, while Keanu's defense had been rooted in authenticity and genuine connection. As Keanu left the courthouse, he could sense the energy around him. People had seen the fight, and they had seen him stand firm in his beliefs. Whatever the outcome of the case, La Maison Elegante had already won something that could never be taken away: the respect and loyalty of its community. The waiting was the hardest part. As the days passed after the court hearing, La Maison Elegante was filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Keanu kept to his usual routine, arriving early in the morning and overseeing the restaurant's daily operations. But there was an underlying tension now, one that couldn't be ignored. Every day felt like a countdown, with the weight of the court's decision looming over them. Sophia, Marco, and the rest of the staff continued to give their all, working with the same passion and commitment that had been present from the beginning. It was clear that the fight for the restaurant had brought them all closer. It wasn't just about saving the place anymore. It was about preserving something that mattered to each of them. Keanu had received messages of support from people all over the world, messages that spoke of how La Maison Elegante had touched their lives in ways they couldn't fully explain. The viral campaign had become more than just a defense of the restaurant. It had become a rallying cry for those who believed that businesses should be built on more than just profits. It was about soul, about purpose. But as the court date for the final decision drew near, Matthews Enterprises was not backing down. The corporate giant had pulled every string, using its vast network to undermine the public sentiment that had built around Keanu's restaurant. They made it clear that they wouldn't accept anything less than ownership, and they were willing to use every tactic at their disposal to make it happen. It was on the morning of the final decision that Keanu received the call. The judge's office had sent word that the ruling was in, and it was time for them to meet. Keanu sat in his office, the phone pressed against his ear, and felt his heart beat faster with anticipation. "Keanu, are you ready for this?" Sophia asked when she walked in, sensing his nervous energy. Keanu took a deep breath. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Let's go." As they entered the courthouse, a crowd had gathered outside, waiting for the verdict. The media was in full force, cameras clicking and flashing as reporters shouted questions. Keanu didn't engage with them. He had learned long ago that the most important thing was to focus on the moment. Inside the courtroom, the judge called the proceedings to order, and the room fell into an expectant silence. Matthews and his team sat at one end, confident and impatient. Keanu and his lawyer stood at the other, surrounded by the quiet support of his staff, who had come to witness the conclusion of the battle. The judge looked up from the papers in front of him. He cleared his throat and addressed the room. After careful consideration of the arguments presented, and after reviewing the overwhelming public sentiment expressed in support of La Maison Elegante, the court finds in favor of Mr. Reeves. A collective sigh of relief swept through Keanu's team. It was done. They had won. The judge continued, his voice steady. It is clear that Mr. Reeves has not only built a successful business, but he has created a space of value within this community. Matthews Enterprises' attempt to take ownership of the restaurant is hereby denied. Keanu felt a weight lift off his shoulders as the judge's words sunk in. He had fought for what was right, and the court had recognized that. But it wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the support of the people, the community that had rallied behind him, that had made all the difference. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. La Maison Elegante had been saved. The support of the people had won out over the cold, calculating corporate forces that had sought to take it. Keanu stood there for a moment, taking it all in. He had done it. But as he looked over at Sophia, Marco, and the rest of the team, he realized something. The real victory wasn't in the court's decision. It was in the way they had all come together to fight for something that mattered. "This is just the beginning," Keanu said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Sophia laughed softly. "Yeah, I think we're going to need a bigger celebration." Keanu grinned. "I'm just happy it's still ours." And as the crowd cheered, the team gathered together, knowing that they had preserved more than just a restaurant. They had protected something that would continue to live on in the hearts of everyone who walked through La Maison Elegante's doors. The celebration that followed the courtroom victory was unlike anything Keanu had ever experienced. La Maison Elegante was filled with laughter, joy, and a palpable sense of relief. The staff, who had worked tirelessly through the ordeal, now felt a renewed sense of pride in what they had accomplished. That night, Keanu stood in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by the people who had supported him, his team, the loyal customers, and the community that had rallied behind the restaurant. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift. The restaurant was secure, but more importantly, it was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together for something they truly believed in. Sophia raised a glass, her smile bright. "To Keanu, for fighting for all of us and for the heart of this place." The team echoed her sentiments, glasses clinking in the air. Keanu smiled, a sense of quiet satisfaction filling him. It hadn't been easy, but the journey had been worth it. As the night wore on, the energy was infectious. Guests who had been following the case and had shown support online came to celebrate alongside the staff. Keanu found himself talking to old friends, new faces, and even a few local celebrities who had tweeted their support. He was humbled by the recognition, but his focus was always on one thing: the future of La Maison Elegante. With Matthews Enterprises out of the picture, Keanu could finally breathe easy. He knew there were challenges ahead, but they weren't the same kind of challenge he'd faced before. The battle for ownership had been fierce, but it had brought people closer. The next step was to ensure the restaurant's legacy continued to grow, not as a financial powerhouse, but as a space for genuine connections. "We've got work to do," Keanu said to Sophia, who stood beside him, watching the celebrations unfold. "But we're in this together. This place, our place, it's going to continue to be something special. Not just for us, but for everyone who walks through that door." Sophia nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "And we'll keep doing it the way we've always done it, with heart, with soul." Keanu looked around the room, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This was the kind of place he had always dreamed of, a restaurant that wasn't just about food, but about making people feel something real. It had been tested, yes, but now it was stronger than ever. La Maison Elegante wasn't just a business, it was a home. The night ended with music, dancing, and an outpouring of affection from all sides. For the first time in months, Keanu allowed himself to truly relax. The fight was over. The future was his to shape. And as the last guest left, Keanu stood outside the restaurant, looking up at the sign that had meant so much to him. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. A promise that no matter what happened, La Maison Elegante would always stand for something more than just fine dining. It would stand for community, authenticity, and the idea that doing things the right way was always worth the fight. "We've only just begun," Keanu whispered to himself, a smile tugging at his lips as he looked up at the night sky. And as the city hummed around him, he knew that no matter what came next, he would always have this: his restaurant, his team, and a future filled with possibilities. If you love this story and want more like it, make sure to like this post, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more heartwarming, thrilling, and inspiring content. Don't miss out on the next chapter in this journey. Your support means everything. Thank you for being part of the story. Keep following for more incredible tales of passion, resilience, and real-life moments that matter. Like, share, and subscribe now.